why don't you just tell us, everyone who's listening? I assume everyone who's clicked on this already knows who you are. But who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm Goose, and I kind of been around on the internet for, I guess, what's a long time now. I started speedrunning GoldenEye in 2005 and was involved with that community for many years, the elite.net, kind of on and off over the first 10, 20 years, I guess. And partway through, I decided to start making video content about speedrunning and kind of into gaming as a whole. And so I started, I guess I was always uploading videos to YouTube since like 2006 or 7, but eventually kind of doing it in the modern content format on my channel that's now called Goose's Gamer Folklore. And I started there about 2017. And yeah, I still upload stories about gaming and mysteries and speed running and these sorts of things. And I started this speed lore series in 2017 as well, where I take one really deep look at one level in GoldenEye speedrunning and go over the history and all the lore of the world records that have been set on this stage.
Very good summary there. Yeah, you came prepared. I feel like with years and everything. So
No, I
how?
just winged all of that.
Yeah,
All of that was completely no, seriously. But you know what? When you've been around for 20 years, you figure out how to
yeah,
wing these sorts of things. And believe many people would think my Speedlore episodes are heavily prepared, and they are to some extent, but a lot of them are just winged commentary of what comes to mind.
yeah. Much like this whole discussion basically is going to be, which is good, and that's also like it's kind of why I chose to reach out to you for this because I feel like we have a sort of similar vibe, which I also picked up during the sort of pre-chat we had about a week ago or whatever. Really good vibes from that. So yeah, feeling really good about having this conversation. A little bit starstruck again, just like I said last time. It's a little bit surreal to be directly communicating with this guy who I saw on AGDQ 11 years ago or something.
Well, I guess the first one was 2014, which is now like 12 and a half years ago, believe it or not.
Yeah, crazy, crazy, and like you said, like you've been around like making content and stuff for about 20 years, or at least engaged online and in communities and things. Pretty crazy that like there are people who like were not yet born who might be watching your channel when you started speedrunning, for example. How does that sort of um how do you think about that at all, or do you like me myself with my like the stuff that I upload or used to upload anyway? I just always considered like, okay, it's just going to be people like me, my own age, my gender, for example, engaging with this. But it's really not. It's really diverse, and the internet really sort of carries you to places that you might not have expected. So what's your like take on all of that, demographics wise, etc.?
No, it's an interesting point you bring up. Now, for me, knowing my demographics, it isn't that many people who are like below the age of 25 who
Mm.
watch my stuff. It is mostly people like me, in the vast overwhelming majority, mid 30s into 40s, which makes sense because that's the people who would have grown up playing GoldenEye.
Yeah,
But
yeah, of course.
the
Yeah.
po- the the point to ponder is that in some cases, especially when it comes to some other games like Super Mario 64, that game has sort of
Mm.
transcended the ages. And so you do see a lot of that content being consumed by people who are much younger, and even the top speedrunners are much younger. And it touches on an interesting point because, you look at the world records in a game like Super Mario 64, and Suigi is the known greatest in current times with numerous world records in this game, and he's a pretty young guy. I think he's a teenage guy, and so the game came out many years before he was born. But the game has transcended the ages, and I think this touches on two interesting points. One is that like the greatest GoldenEye player of all time is Perfect Ace, and Ace is he's like in his early 30s now, but he started playing the game when he was like 10 years old. And
Mm.
so he formed these sort of like that's what the analysis we've given over the years, like he formed these like twitch muscles to learn how to respond and interpret the game way better than anyone else who picked up the game at 16 or 18 or 20 years old. And this has given Ace like the edge over the decades. And likewise, I think we see this with Suigi now in Super Mario 64, is that because he started playing the game so young, it's given him this edge beyond belief of what you can imagine. Um, I also think of esports guys and other gamers who have won competitions, like when they had that big Fortnite tournament in New York City at Flushing Meadows, a 13-year-old young boy won. And so it's like perhaps the best gamers are younger. And perhaps as I become more of an old man, there's like less possibility to compete with these young bucks. But it's not true for every game. Some games are not going to maintain the interest among the younger generations, whereas others like Super Mario 64 will.
Yeah, it's probably like I mean, I don't want to like look down on any, but I think a game like GoldenEye is a lot harder to like because you have all of these old I have like separate like questions and paths about this later, but you have these old foxes, kicking around. If you take my meaning, yourself, Perfect Days, people like that, the whole the elite community, basically, which is probably a little bit scary for someone like really young who wasn't like, these guys have been around, they're like sort of battle hardened, battle scarred veterans, sort of. And I'm sure that exists in other communities as well, but I think the elite is a really special example of that. And like, I don't know, it could be a factor in a decision like what game would I want to like dive into.
It's one of those interesting things where, like, not every game is destined to have a big speed run or competitive scene, and like that's okay. And these are things that I've certainly pondered over the years. Is like there's kind of these scales to it. Like, Mario 64 is the game, and I know there's a couple others as well that are very popular for speed running, but like that's just the one with so much staying power. And
Mm.
it's like the soccer of speedrunning, right? It's the one that everyone plays. And
Yeah,
then
easy to
something
pick up and like hard to master, basically.
right, it just has you can't even explain why, and I think it would almost be a fool's errand to try to drill down on the why, but just like that's the way, like, why is soccer more popular? People attribute it to being accessible or whatever, and sure. But there's lots of accessible games and lots of accessible sports. But the point being, then there's other games that have, maybe a moderate scene, and then some games that might have zero scene at all. And these is it a tragedy that some games just don't have a competitive speedrun scene or not? And I don't know, just something that you can only ponder forever, really.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, my speedrun game of choice is Star Wars Rogue Squadron, which has like at best, I think there's like five of us that are like semi active in that game. But, that gives it has its own perks. Like you get to know people a lot better. I'm not really a sort of online community type of guy, but I have really what I would call quite close friendships with a lot of those people, and also like these rivalries that like you compete for a single IL, for example, and you go tit for tat. One day you get someone pushes it like that little bit further, and the next day someone else does. So definitely like, and also like you say, is it necessarily a tragedy that a smaller game doesn't have the community that another game might, or is it just sort of natural selection where the best games will necessarily rise to the top? Because we also have to think about this dates back to before we were dealing with all this algorithmic, steering of engagement, for example, back when YouTube was a lot more directed on sort of vibes, like word of mouth, like, oh, have you seen this speedrun, for example? I remember even early on, like I was subscribed to this old Swedish video gaming newspaper called Loading, and they even had an article. Like they had someone probably on the staff interested in speedrunning, and they had like this article about this really old tool assisted speedrun of Super Mario Bros. 3. where like just through word of mouth, like, oh, you can watch it here, and that like they printed the URL, so you had to copy it from the paper and everything. This is way back, probably pre YouTube even. And like, yeah, it's interesting how like, yeah, like I said, does having a smaller community necessarily, is it necessarily a tragedy, or is it sort of natural selection, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, what's life? How come some great cities and empires flourish while others do not? It's like I know people try to attribute reasons to this or that of why it happens.
Mm.
I don't know. There's like on one hand, to say it's a total fluke, I think is not correct because like Super Mario 64 is sort of the definitive speed game and is like the definitive legendary video game of all time. And so like that can't be a coincidence, this game is a masterpiece in that way. And you could probably say the same for some of these other games that have had competitive speedrun scenes from that era over the years, like GoldenEye or Ocarina of Time or Mario Kart 64. And I would even extend to like Smash Bros. Um, that scene has emerged competitively because that's a very good game as well. And so, but is a good game necessarily going to be a good competitive game? And that
Mm.
certainly is not always the case. There's puzzle games and games that just don't fit that way. I really the main thing is like how good is the movement in this game? How freely can you flow with the movement? And then if it's like a legendary game on top of that, um, that's like I think the main indicator, and that's why Super Mario 64 is so enjoyable and has had that staying power.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still hold up Mario 64 as like, I think it has better movement than Sunshine, which came after, than Galaxy, that came twice after. I think it has better movement than Odyssey, even, the Switch release. Call it nostalgia. People watching this, hearing this might flame me for it, but like, pick up Super Mario 64. No fucking joke. Pick it up and just feel how crisp every input is, so intentional. And I also think that like the older sort of polygonal graphics make it really clear like where you have to go, when you have to press for your wall kick. You don't have, a bunch of particle effects going on. Everything feels so intentional. And it's also interesting that you only mentioned Nintendo titles as well, Ocarina of Time, Mario Kart, Smash, Mario 64. I mean, GoldenEye, I guess Rare was like a second party developer, sort of, so we'll count that as Nintendo as well. So you seem to be sort of a Nintendo kind of guy. Is that like, would that be a correct assessment, or?
Well, it's true, and it's mostly just because of my own blind spots. Like I've never had a PlayStation console in my life, just growing up with Nintendo. And it's one of those things where, especially as I started making content, it's like I feel like I there's nothing of unique value that I can offer about games that I haven't like necessarily played or understood. It's like sure
Mm.
there's some great games on the PlayStations, but like what can I talk about Spyro or Crash Bandicoot when I've never played them? I have no unique insight to share. Whereas certainly I have a lot of unique insight to share about GoldenEye and as well other Nintendo 64 games that I, played hundreds, if not thousands of hours back in the day. And I think that is important not to just kind of BS my way and make nonsense content, to actually have some unique insight to provide. So I do just have an unfortunate big blind spot with PlayStation, and that's just the way it is.
That's also a really good. It's a really good description of your philosophy on content creation as well, which I think is really admirable. That why would I create something where I'm not necessarily, performing at the peak level of what I could be? I think that's really nice and a really good testament to, your whole philosophy on things. But I think this leads us sort of into my next question here, which is like, GoldenEye is, we've mentioned GoldenEye sort of in the periphery here. It is sort of front and center to your whole persona, right, online, and that's sort of part of who you are in a way. So what would you say, like, when did you first come into contact with GoldenEye?
Okay, so it's one of those kind of funny stories where, maybe I've always been a little bit of a contrarian, especially as I was younger. And so when I was like 10 years old, it's like late 90s, early 2000s, I was kind of like, oh, all these kids talking about GoldenEye and Zelda, like, who cares? I don't care to try these games. Um, But then when I did, at friends' sleepovers and stuff, I had a great time. I was like, oh my god, these games are actually really really good. And so GoldenEye, particularly, I started playing a lot. Eventually, I got my own copy of it and played through the game, and got decent at it. And I was one of those kids who, I would go unlock the cheats for other kids at school. I'd go out over after school and beat Facility Double O Agent in under 2 minutes 5 seconds to get them invincibility and whatnot. Um, I guess also I was lucky in a way that I had some access to the internet back then, not too much, but like I would actually go into the office with my dad a fair bit, and he had internet, downtown in the big city. And when I was there as like a 10-year-old, you could really make a funny kind of like Wojak meme about this. It's like, and they're like, yeah, 10 or 12 on the internet in some fancy office downtown, and like I'm looking up like the GoldenEye websites and codes and stuff. And even my dad would sometimes print off pages if I guess he was bored at work, and find like what were these old game FAQs pages of like walkthroughs and maps of the stages and stuff. And around that kind of time of kind of early, you're a kid still, early kind of internet access, I did find the Elite at some point, the Elite, the speedrunning community for GoldenEye. And I just kind of noted it was there. And I'm like, wow, these guys have these amazing world records on some of these difficult stages. Like, that's crazy. How do you do that? I know a lot of people, when they see the times for the first time, are like very suspicious, but I was not
Mm.
suspicious. I felt like the websites were substantial enough where it was all like legit. And I just kind of like knew it was there kind of in the background. And then one day in 2005, it was actually Canada Day 2005, so July 1st. And I'm about 15 years old now, not quite 16. And I had a cousin come over, and we are just hanging out in a hot, blistering day, as Canada days are. And we turned on the N64 because that's what we, would do playing games as years passed. He would come over, we play N64 a lot. I turned it on and we played GoldenEye again, one of our favorites. And then I just remembered, like, man, what about that speed running community? I wonder if it's still there. And I found it, and I'm like, okay, I'm getting older now. I can kind of sign up on my own. And funnily enough, even at 15, I felt like I was wasting time playing video games, wasting my life away. And it was like, well, if I sign up and like compete, at least that's something of some value that I can get out of engaging with this game and playing, and speedrunning. And so I signed up for the community, and it was summer 2005, and the rest, I suppose, as they say, is history.
Nice, nice. I have to say I'm relating in such in like an amazing way because I shit you not, I had printed off weapon stats from GoldenEye in a little binder that I printed on the home printer that we had when I was little. What you're saying about like finding sort of new purpose, although this happened to me a lot later in my life, was I was also feeling like not really that I was getting too old for it, but I'd sort of lost my spark for video gaming a little bit, and then I was just idly playing this Star Wars Rogue Squadron game, and I thought like, hey, I finished that level pretty quickly. What I wonder what like if there's a speedrun.com page, and yeah, same thing here. Even though my history is only like 4 or 5 years now, but yeah, I'm relating on like a really deep level, which is pretty funny.
No, that's exactly it. And it's like, I guess even when I was like 13, 14 years old, it's like, okay, I'm playing a video game. Like, what's the point? Like, is this
Mm,
like it's a waste of time?
yeah.
It's not to say that it's not still a waste of time, but it's like, okay, now I can interface with the community. I can submit my records. I can like I guess it just like it's kind of the story of like growing up as a young man in the world and
Mm.
learning how you can input your will and interface with the world and influence and affect things, I suppose. And isn't that this, I guess, the story of coming of age for us all? And I suppose, I realized that I could have some kind of impact like that playing a video game, and you can debate certainly the impacts of that in comparison to doing something more useful with your life. But yeah, it kind of just took off from there.
I guess it's happened to all of us. Like anyone who's, I mean, it doesn't even have to be speedrunning, right? It could be content creation. It could be just getting really engaged in any sort of online community where there's always some kind of moment where it, like, it clicks over and, okay, wow, this is something that like gives me some kind of positive feedback, from other people or just internally from myself, like gives me that sort of fuzzy warm feeling that we're all after, in one form or another. um but yeah, really interesting to like dive into, and also, like you say, to like put it in a growth perspective, like, okay, who was I when I started playing this game, and who am I now that I'm sort of making something new of it, which also sort of fits into my growth as a human being, I guess, without making it sound too dramatic.
Yeah, and sometimes like I think about it, I really do. Is like, okay, when I joined, there were some legends of the game involved, like the Big Boss Man and Wouter Jansen, and they certainly had their influence and like some of the most insane influence. Like you can compare to early athletes and pioneers in sport and so on.
Mm,
But after I joined, we had guys like Perfect Ace and Clemens and Mark Rutsu, and like we've had these legendary battles over the years, and grinds and hurling insults at one another, and we all get
yeah,
along now, but just these insane battles on the internet, um and like all for what? Over a video game. And sometimes I wonder, like, was it worth it? And I think that's a fair thing to ponder. And it's like, how would things be different though if none of it happened? It kind of just weighing the balance of the two. Like, I wish some days you wish none of it happened, and other days you wish that like you just like kind of appreciate that it all happened.
yeah. I mean, I guess you have to sort of look at it again from a growth perspective. Like, we had to do all of this to like get where we are now, to get to where we were going the whole time, I suppose. That is, if you consider where you are right now to be a good place, which I guess for the elite it would be. Everyone has these. If we go back in sports history as well and compare like the level of performance. Let's take the World Cup for example, the soccer World Cup that's currently going on, or I should say football. Too Americanized here, but like compare sort of overall performance like 50 years ago to today, and it's basically a whole different sport, which is the case for a lot of things. So I think these sort of infantile diseases are a sort of rite of passage for any community or any activity, hobby, whatever it might be. And yeah, really interesting to, or it must have been, or it must be really interesting to have been and still be a part of that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just like, what is the point of anything is really what it comes down to. And like, these are not questions that we can solve here in a gaming community or in a adjacent podcast or whatever the case may
Yeah.
be. It's like, but that really is ultimately it. It's like, what's the point of anything? And even as a man, I know there's some kind of commentary online sometimes about how like it's just such a pursuit to like climb a mountain, and like what's the point? And the
Mm,
point's like you could get to the top and you just like look around and ponder about life. And I guess that's just the point of everything, including sometimes speedrunning as well.
yeah. Yeah, I mean the classic quote, like, why do you climb the mountain? Well, because it's there, right? And why do you compete to get the fastest time in this video game that 20 other people in the world are are also trying for? Well, because it's also there. Not to compare like the physical achievement of it, but the mindset, I think, is sort of similar, where we have to keep pushing the limits. Like, there's this quote from my one of my favorite TV shows, The West Wing, which goes, why should we go to Mars? We already landed on the moon. Like, because it's next. The timeline of man is hung on a timeline of exploration, and this is what's next. We went out of the cave and we saw fire, and we went over the hill and we went over the ocean, and this is what's next. So in any sort of form, I think human beings are just always going to try to do two things: compete, amongst each other and towards ourselves, right? How far can I push myself, and how far are others pushing themselves, and can I sort of beat that envelope that's been set?
No, it's a great point, and to that point, it's like, okay, here's a thought that came to mind. It's like when we compete, it's like we're almost like cutting our teeth or practicing to compete in then something that matters. And of course, in the modern age, like playing a video game, speedrunning, these guys, we don't go on to become these great warriors or whatever. But it's like traditionally, sports and competition has served as like, oh, who's like the best athlete who can like then go become like the best warrior. And then even when you
Mm,
talk about the age of exploration, I think of like a lot of these astronauts these days who are pushing to Mars and the moon missions and whatnot were formerly military guys, fighter pilots,
yeah.
test pilots, and Navy SEALs and stuff. And so it's like, yeah, that was like everything's like a process to keep pushing the boundaries of humanity. I know it's like a far leap from video games, but I think that
Yeah.
core belief and that core growth is what's there when we think about the nature of competition.
Right, absolutely. This fundamental drive to like, what can I do? And also, while I'm at it, what can others do? Just so I know where I rank among my fellow primates, so to speak. So yeah, absolutely.
Right, and it becomes like, okay, who has the most skill? Who can interpret this? Who has the most whatever physical prowess, so that it's worth like continuing to train them for whatever this greater purpose is. And the other people who come up short, well, they find their own purpose, doing something else on the farm or whatever, or nowadays in some office with fluorescent lighting, I suppose. And that's the way it is. We figure out who is going to go to Mars and who's not going to go to Mars.
Yeah. And don't we all sort of want to be that old, sort of previously hardened samurai warrior, sitting on his farm and like, smoking our pipe and having all these stories to tell about what we used to do and things. Which I guess in a way is a little bit what you do as well when you retell not only your own stories but those of others as well. Um, not only were warriors and athletes always very important, but also chroniclers, right? To tell the stories, to build up these legends, and keep them alive for others to also enjoy and regale themselves with.
No, that's exactly it, and that's why I started really doing this. At some point, I realized like, man, there's diminishing returns in actually playing a game yourself. It kind of like fractalizes upon itself. Like
Mm,
you put 5 hours into a game or a level and you start improving, and then 10 hours and you're getting better, and 50 hours, and like now you're pushing for world records, but it's like 500 hours or 5,000 hours. It becomes like this inception, like folding in upon itself, where it's like, oh my god, what's the point? This is actually becoming insane and not fruitful at all. There's diminishing returns on the fruit that you can bear playing a single level in Goldeneye for 1,000 hours. And so at some point, I decided I'm going to change to telling the stories of the people who did compete, and why that is perhaps important to in some regard. Is it important? Maybe, maybe not. But then again, are any of the stories I guess at some point I would wonder that if it's important or not. But stories are important, clearly, because we've been telling stories as humans to each other since before we even had written language. So there you go. I eventually decided to change to telling stories instead, and here we are.
mm. Yeah, sort of a warrior monk thing going on if we were to to uh to continue the metaphor there. Which is of course a really good thing. And I also think this I forget who said it, but I think this quote meaning is a sweater that you have to knit for yourself, right? I think that also feeds into it. Like, who is any of us to say like to these to Suiji, for example, this young man making a name and a career for himself by being the best at something that a lot of people have tried to be the best at over the years, although not that many years yet. Who is anyone else to say? You mentioned that Fortnite like World Championship where I clearly remember, even though I've never been a Fortnite player, I clearly remember like morning talk show hosts in the US and stuff like laughing at this kid who just won $1 million, right, in a video game tournament. Like, oh, what are you doing with your time? Well, he just made more money than probably you did in the last 3 years or whatever. So, like, is this stigma sort of and this is something I think that we'll get more into later as well. But like, is the stigma sort of? Do you think it's sort of a motivating factor in some cases where, like, I'll show them sort of, or is it wholesale a negative thing? Do you think?
Well, what comes to mind with me there is like this idea of the sort of tragic, washed up warrior in a way. And whether it comes to video games or sports, or certainly we see it a lot in the military these days, guys who may have had great success at a video game, at a sport, at a in a military career, and then once that's done, they have nothing left and they can't progress and proceed through the world, and so it's like not necessarily a waste of time to learn these skills or accomplish this or win some award, but then like to always like what's next in life. And yeah, it's okay to become the warrior monk and document things and so on, or find some other purpose, whatever it may be. But it's almost the kind of tragic tale we have in North America about the guy who peaked in high school. He threw the touchdown to win the Friday night game in high school, and like that's the biggest accomplishment in his life now, right? And so certainly to dump on a kid for winning a Fortnite tournament is silly because he's still young and has so much potential.
Mm,
But then it's like, what's next in life, I suppose.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it must be. I mean, you have to ask that of. I mean, we've mentioned Suigi a couple of times now, but someone who's that young, and I think we can say that young because, like you said, I think he's like, what could he be, 16, 17, or something? Um,
Yeah, somewhere around there.
it's difficult to like. Okay, you're the best in the world at this thing that in the case of Super Mario 64, a lot of people do. It's a really popular speed game, so like, where do you sort of go from here? And it's going to be really interesting to see if you end up in a sort of situation where he can still hold his own, or if these, because Super Mario 64 is a really special speed game, which has a lot of, really precise inputs, really, it's really, reaction focused and really quick, etc. Which, ironically, not all speed games are that quick, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how if and how someone like that can sort of keep their claim to the throne, or if younger newer players are sort of going to keep coming in and sort of rotate that record out.
Well, that's exactly it. I think in a game like Mario 64, it is possible that newer, younger players come along. But I don't think that's necessarily true for most other games of this era, this late 90s, early 2000s era, which, I think is the best era in gaming, the most influential and so on. And I think it mattered significantly, the leap to 3D and whatever. So I do think these are the greatest games of all time, but I do also believe that they won't be as competed over the years. But like Mario 64 is sort of different in some regard because it has that staying power and it's like established itself in that way. Just the fact that younger people who've been born well after its release have picked it up and played it and speedrun it is proof that that can continue happening. So I do think that that'll be the case, and yeah, maybe someone, this is a tale as old as time throughout history as well. Someone younger and stronger or more beautiful or whatever comes along and kicks you off the throne, and that's the nature of life as well. So we'll see if that happens. But then you also, when it comes to speedrunning particularly, you get into these discussions of like the end times of speedrunning or the heat death, as I used to call it, where nothing more can be improved. And then it's like, well, then competition is done because there's no more seconds to be cut off from any of this.
Yeah, interesting thing as well. Like, there has to logically be an end to any speed game. There has to be like a human theory limit where and I think Super Mario 64, and definitely the first Super Mario Brothers game on the NES is, we're down to, I think we're down to like within frames of the TAS on Mario Bros. I'm not really caught up with what's his name, Cosmic, I think.
Yeah,
world
it's a
record
couple.
holder.
They're a couple frames away, like one or two, or a few frames away from the perfect run.
Which is fucking insane. Like if you told me that just like 10 or 12 years ago, which is not that long, and like it is pretty a pretty long time in like modern speedrunning parlance, so to speak, but it's not a long time considering that the game was released in 86, right? Um, but like people are playing it on like these like hyper specialized keyboards because a lot of these runs are done on emulator, which is fine, as long as the community agrees. Probably something we will talk a little bit about later as well. Um, but yeah, really interesting to like see where because I'm sure you're familiar with ZFG, Ocarina of Time speedrunner, right?
Of course.
Yeah, I mean he usually does these human theory TAS where he plays through every part of the game as good, with replays and stuff, and just does it as good as he could possibly do it. And it's always good and interesting to have that baseline where like how close are we to with the current strategies, like how much more time can be pressed out, and where do you think GoldenEye is on that sort of scale? Is it where is the doomsday clock at the moment? Is it 2 seconds to midnight or 2 minutes, or how would you judge that in your own estimation?
Well, so okay, so this is what I was going to ponder when it comes to the Mario Bros thing, and this applies to GoldenEye and other games as well. Is like not that long ago, people thought 454 was impossible in Mario Bros, but there were new discoveries that then made it possible. And so eventually, you're going to run out of discoveries, but like that's always this sort of like a hidden possibility. Is it's like something new could be found that drops us lower. Now, in GoldenEye in particular, there was this big quest because the total time of the game was you add up the world record on all of the 20 levels on all three difficulties, so 60 total stages. And it's always when I joined the community, it was like 116, 117, 1 hour, 16 minutes. And slowly we trimmed it down to the 110s. It was like, can we ever get below 110? And there was this final push to do it like last year. And all of a sudden, someone discovered a skip on the train stage where you no longer have to
Right,
laser
right.
off the locks, saving like 6 seconds. And so that's quite a remarkable thing that then can occur all of a sudden. So even if like most levels, a few seconds can come off, something like that can be found. And even now, the same guy, his name is Onslat. He's sort of the speedrun scientist, as I call them. He's working on like something to go out of bounds on control, possibly saving like 20 to 30 seconds on control on all three difficulties. And so it's like, it's such an interesting thing because on one hand, like, yeah, there's that kind of the natural gameplay where it's like a more skilled run, a smarter run can cut off a second or two. But then, like, there are these characters who come along and like really change things significantly by discovering these new strategies. And it's like, well, on one hand, what if they never came along and discovered these things? And then on the second hand, um, it's like, oh man, did I even have a second hand there? Yeah, it's like, sometimes it goes. It's like, uh, um, yeah, just how much further can things be pushed in a certain way, and like, does it matter? But like, it's so interesting. I think that so many of these interesting strategies and like shortcuts. Mario Kart 64 is a great example where there's so many shortcuts now where you can just complete a lap in like 0.01 seconds. And it's like you could have done that on day one of the game being released
Yeah, if you had
if
just
you had the
known.
knowledge.
Yeah.
And so the unveiling of the knowledge is such a fascinating avenue in the course of all of this.
Yeah, and you in our pre-chat earlier, you had this you dropped this quote, this well-known banger of a line that says, there are decades where nothing happens, and there are days when decades happen, right? And it's the same thing here. There are like these tit for tat battles where okay, I'm lowering 1 second, and I'm lowering the next second, and things like that. And there's also things where, well, we could mention, we could reconnect to the train clip there. We could mention the barrier skip in Wind Waker, for example. Wrong warping, sort of as a whole, in Ocarina of Time. There are these paradigm shifts, which it's also a really good thing because it often allows new runners to sort of, or runners who may have been in the sort of periphery of the community, but not sort of at the top, they might, give their all in like spend all their energy getting really good at this new tech, and suddenly just rocket up the leaderboards, which is a really interesting part of this sport, shall we call it, or whatever you want to say. Really interesting that things like that can happen and are still happening.
Right, and so we would call that a gold rush in GoldenEye. I mean, I kinda coined that term in a video a few years ago, but that's the way it is. It's like you someone's found a new vein of gold, and so we're gonna run out there and try to win in the ways that we've done throughout human history that way. Yeah, I mean, the Ocarina of Time wrong warp is one of the most interesting ones, to see the world record progression around that time. There's some great Excel spreadsheet out there that tracks it all, and to just think of these records falling and just so much going on, to be a part of a community when something like that is happening is a very unique and epic feeling. It's like being at the forefront of the Yukon Gold Rush, for example. You know
Uh,
you're a part of something historical, and you can just kind of take it in and appreciate it. And as you say, it kind of does have an equalizing effect on the community, where at least for a while, everyone's kind of on new ground, until the dust kind of settles, which is pretty cool.
yeah, I mean, there are these. It's so interesting to see, like, just suddenly wake up and like, okay, 5 minutes has come off the. This is never going to happen anymore. But like for those of us who were around when, Cosmos Legendary, I think it was like 18-minute 10 run, 1812 or something. In Ocarina of Time, waking up and sort of seeing that notification and that like, wow, this really happened, sort of. Even though I've never run Ocarina of Time, I've played it thousands of times. I've never run it. I know some tech that I use, here and there just to make my own playthroughs easier. But even having never, done a run or uploaded anything, even then, just being part of it feels so invigorating in a way where it is a lot like sports, because you're not the person on the football field or whatever you want to whatever simile you want to draw, but you still feel so inexorably connected to what's going on out there. So yeah, I think it really plays into the sort of human need for belonging and community as well, which is neat and great.
Right, and having the context is important as well, and that's why, I used to, promote this thing back in, like, 2012, 13 called the N64 Triathlon, which was beat GoldenEye any percent, Agent difficulty, Ocarina of Time any percent, and Super Mario 64 16 star. And I kinda I never really saw it through fully, but it was like, try to beat all of them in under 1 hour. Is it possible? And people kinda laughed about it, but it was things were different back then, but the point was, like, these are some of the most popular games from that era, and so it makes sense to kind of collect them in that way and tie them together because they're the games that the most people had played from that era. And so just even if you don't necessarily speedrun a game, having at least the knowledge that you played it and kind of understanding to some extent what is going on, that does matter. And that is why, I would get a lot of flack 12 years, 10 years ago for this. Being like some games like matter or have more significance than others. And I do stand by that. I think people understand it more now, but it's like if you have an amazing optimized world record in some like obscure game that sold 10,000 copies, um, no one can relate. But if you're the record in Super Mario 64 that sold 10 million copies and everyone has played, now a lot of people can relate, and now it's much more significant. But there's sort of diminishing returns on that to some extent as well, because nowadays these games like GTA 5 and Minecraft and stuff have sold hundreds of millions of copies. But I feel like GTA 5 has evolved such a massive landscape beyond just speedrunning, for example. Like, I guess in a way, Mario 64, the way to compete and play it was speedrunning. Whereas in modern games, there's so many more avenues of exploration and interfacing with the game. So you kind of wonder. I guess I kind of paint that N64 era as this golden era of this sort of speedrunning nature. And that's why competition has grown so wonderfully there.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to mention like popularity and stuff as well, because I wanted to ask about Perfect Dark, of course, which it's sort of impossible to mention GoldenEye without also, you mention GoldenEye on the exhale, and then you on the inhale you sort of mention Perfect Dark in the background. Um, you mentioned you sort of started playing GoldenEye on these these sleepovers and everything. Were you a Perfect Dark player as well back in the day, or has that never really, because GoldenEye is your sort of kit and caboodle, right? It's the main thing. But where does Perfect Dark sort of fit into it for you?
Okay, so Perfect Dark, I never personally owned it, but my cousin had it, so I played it a little bit growing up. And of course, as you say, they go hand in hand. The Elite.net speedrunning community has the rankings for both GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. Perfect Dark is, I hear arguments that Perfect Dark is the better game, and I can agree with that, honestly. It's a more kind of complete game. There's more going on, there's more to it. The speedrunning nature of it, and again, they've kind of gone hand in hand. There's been players who have been the champion in both games. The skills are transferable. Nowadays, though, the problem with Perfect Dark is the pausing, and some of the guys don't like it, but it's true. In GoldenEye, a pause takes 5 seconds, so you don't want to like pause beyond what is necessary. It loses real in-game time. So an extra pause is just not something you do. In Perfect Dark, pausing is essentially free. You
Mm,
lose a bit of your momentum and strafing, but there's so many points in the game where, if you're turning or doing a difficult shot, you're not at full speed anyways. So you can afford to pause. And as a result, some of these records, the stage should be 2.5 minutes, but the video of the record's like 10 minutes long because guys are
mm,
just pause buffering the entire stage. And like, I get it, you're still competing for a score, and that's just the nature of how this game is played, and fair enough. But it does take something away from it. And I kind of noticed this when doing speed lore episodes of Perfect Dark, is that your kind of typical, semi-casual viewer is like, man, the pause buffering sucks, frankly. And so
yeah,
yeah, people still compete in Perfect Dark. The rankings are still there. um, it's always kind of been, even though it's a better game, it's kind of like always been the little brother in terms of a speedrunning scene. It's kind of like the
yeah.
secondary game to GoldenEye. And as a result, and especially because of the pause buffering, it just kind of like has taken a back seat, especially in the last couple years.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree on it, technically but fully on a technical level being a better game. But I was also thinking about this just earlier today when I was sort of mentally like going through my notes for this conversation. Like if I want to kick back and like, play something on the 64, I would much rather just start up an agent run of Damn than, go to an agent run of Defection, for example. Which is weird because like I would absolutely say that Perfect Dark is the better game, and I would say technically it probably has a better multiplayer, but I've played a heck of a lot more GoldenEye multiplayer than I have Perfect Dark, right? So it is strange, and it's interesting to hear it even from a speedrunning perspective, where it's like, yeah, I mean, it should be sort of better, but it's not really. um, so yeah, really interesting perspective there.
It's one of those things I kind of regret in a way too. I mean, look, when you're a kid playing these games, you have no idea that 20 years later you're still going to be talking about it, let alone making content from it. But it's, yeah, especially with the multiplayer, like there's so many kind of mysteries and oddities that are interesting to ponder now. People write to me with them all the time, and I just don't have that much context to explore it.
Hmm.
When I do meet up with Perfect Ace, like he grew up with both GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. And so when I meet up with Ace, it's like, okay, let's just sit down and explore Perfect Dark and mess around and really dig into this game. Because there's all these levels and then multiplayer stages and just it's really unbelievable the depths. There's so much more to explore in that game. And I feel like I can never kind of scratch beyond the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. And you mentioned also about the pause buffering. Has there been any sort of discussion in the Elite or anywhere else about, moving away from IGT and going RTA, for example.
Like, you could do that, but the thing is, then it's just so troll to, like, play out a speed run of a stage, and you have the in-game timer telling you one thing, and the real timer telling you something, and it's like, how do you square this circle? It just feels so wrong to do, and then not only that, but, like, it's sort of an unspoken thing that I mean, I tried bringing this up like 10 years ago in speedrunning and got a lot of pushback is like, how reliable are these external timers anyways that everyone else is like using? And we've seen situations where, moderators have had to retime records. Certainly in competitive games, that's going to happen. But in less competitive games, there could be a lot of records submitted with like the wrong time, and like how much does that matter? It's not like every single speedrunner can get like a nuclear atomic clock to measure their runs. So it's like, how do you square that circle?
Yeah, I mean, really interesting because you also have to, especially with Perfect Dark, you have to sort of think of it. It doesn't exist in a vacuum in a speedrun sense because it has to, and it will necessarily always be compared to GoldenEye, which, is going to keep. I'm ready to put money on it that, GoldenEye will never ever move to RTA because it's just too ingrained and like, it's just the way things are done. But there's a legitimate case for going RTA on Perfect Dark side, but Perfect Dark is always going to have to be in that shadow. So, should Perfect Dark sort of go off on its own, which might mean, in a longer timeline perspective, it might mean a departure even from the Elite, for example. Um so yeah, really big conversation to have, and maybe not one that the community is necessarily ready to have either.
I think a thing with it is like you can view the in-game timer as a sort of like high score marker, although it's kind of a low score, right, to minimize the time. And so even if that timer is like faulty or whatever, it's like that's still the kind of marker or score that you get after each run. And so because of that, everyone's on an even playing field. And I think it's just better to, I think even playing field matters. And so it's better to have that in-game timer as your score than open it up to all these externalities that external timers bring into it. That's my opinion on it all.
Absolutely, I have to agree. I mean, and I also run a game where we use IGT, right? So I have this. I mean, I basically did what would be our damn 52 for Rogue Squadron is ambush at Mos Eisley 32 seconds, which is within one frame of 33. So it's one frame at 60 frames per second off from a full second of IGT higher, and it might get matched at some point in the future, but I think it's a lot more, it's a lot more fulfilling to have these full seconds to work towards rather than, milliseconds or microseconds that you might be measuring otherwise. And then you also have to get into things like, especially when you're running on, an old console, like what's your setup? What frame rate are you recording at? What are you using an auto timer? Are you not using an auto timer? We have to manually time this from the video, etc. So I think IGT has a lot of inherent positives, and like you said, it levels the playing field to where what's on the screen is what's on the screen, and you can't really argue with it. But yeah, might be a future discussion for Perfect Dark Runners to have that. You might even go the route of like we might limit the pause buffers per stage or something like that, but that also gets really really technical and might scare people off from competing as well.
No, it's true. There's people have lightly pondered to limit the pause buffers, but another avenue is to just do full game runs, where then it is you do have an external timer in that case, playing the entire game, disincentivized to take breaks and whatnot. Um, but yeah, I mean, look, on one hand, it's like I do get the arguments where it's like play the game the way you want to play, and so maybe there's some guys gonna come along and get decent without pause buffering, and just to kind of make a statement. Who knows? Who knows the way things will shake out in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, one of the things that are also interesting, it's not only about the gameplay and like who's fastest, it's also about the metagame. Like, how do we actually consider, the times, and how do we measure things? What tools do we use? What tools do we allow and not allow? That's also something that's really interesting, and also goes a lot deeper, I think, than people anticipate at first, when they might be, first starting out. All I need is my little console and some way to record. But then, there might be strategies that involve specific equipment or specific setups and things that might not be that evident from the start.
No, and see that's why I love GoldenEye so much, because it is that simple. You just turn on the game, and the timer's there on the screen. And same goes for like Mario Kart 64, and even like some Mario Party mini games. It's just like there's the timer, there's the game, and have at it. But you're right, there are all these discussions. I remember like when I was first starting out on YouTube, 2017, 18, you would get in these debates about like, oh, is it okay if this game uses some like modified ROM, or we skip this cutscene? You like start a file and save and restart, and it would be these like hugely controversial decisions, and we get so many people fired up, and I remember covering it a few times, but you would just get people mired. It's just a quagmire of muck that was never ending, and it was like, man, this is just stay as far away as possible from these discussions.
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff that you necessarily have to sort of steer clear of, just to keep your sanity, keep your general estimation of humanity in check a little bit, because the internet can get quite nasty sometimes. And like you said as well earlier, I think this was a lot more of that went on. Things today have become really sanitized, for better or for worse. I think there's some merit to all the shit slinging and trash talk, etc. As long as it's kept on as long as everyone knows what the level is that we're keeping it at. But also, of course, it's good that people aren't scared off from joining up or competing just because someone said something stupid once, and we might have lost one or two generational talents because someone got sort of spooked off, which is of course something that we don't want.
Right, but what comes to mind there is sort of the, cutting your teeth online. I think of like military boot camp is like, there's kind of this whole system in place, when you join the military, not that I ever have, but where you kind of are bullied and scared off, and not everyone continues. Not to say that that's necessarily a good thing. It serves its purpose in the military, but they're just sort of a part of any kind of male heavy environment where there's going to be a level of razzing, or what do you call when you bring people into a community.
Hazing, yeah.
And yeah, yeah, there's another term too, because hazing is a bit heavy, but
Yeah.
um yeah, no, but I know what you mean, and it's like, sure, is it necessary? Probably not, but especially in the early internet, that's the way it went for a lot of us. But yeah, you do wonder about these people who departed never to be seen again, and they become these sort of mysterious legends, and those become some of my favorite stories to tell and ponder. Like, what if they're still out there somewhere? And there was a crazy one in The World Is Not Enough, kind of a more obscure speed run, where this guy Bo Peep set a bunch of insane records, and after pondering it a few times, he came back and set a few more records, and then only to disappear into the winds once again. So it's just the nature of the world, but everywhere in the world has these kind of crazy stories, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, probably. I mean, just in the Rogue Squadron community, we have these this old community was uncovered on, I think it was on something like GeoCities, one of these hosting websites back in the day. Something that was a little bit like the Elite, but for Rogue Squadron. And just like you said previously, like just like you alluded to, where some people thought that some of these times were made up, and we did when we found them. But then we ourselves rediscovered tech that evidently these previous runners knew about, and we're talking back around the release of the game, which is like 2000 or 2001. So really, really sort of overlapping with the Elite a little bit, I think, possibly, or at least in the same vein. And it's really interesting to see, like, we thought, or at least I myself speaking, like in the first person, I thought a bunch of these times, like, this has to be like made up. This is just bragging online, like, nothing to back it up or anything. And then we discover strategies that, yeah, they might not have. The times might still be made up, but the times that we had saved from back then matched up a little too well with the times that we were ourselves achieving with these strategies that we rediscovered. So there's always going to be this sort of element of like digital archaeology a little bit that's going on as well, which is really exciting.
Right, I was gonna say, you gotta send me this story because that sounds like one I would love to take a dig into.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to like dig deeper into it, I could probably send you something. Probably send you a little package on that. I could probably collect something for you.
That
Absolutely.
would be remarkable. I think it sounds like there's a whole long form video there somewhere. So that'd be really cool to ponder.
Nice. I mean, you're welcome to join the Rogue Squadron speedrunning Discord if you want to just look around. I think we have some of the stuff saved there. But we can talk about that after we're done here, of course.
Oh yeah.
Right. Well, great, interesting. So I want to ask the question, like, we already sort of covered like your path to starting speedrunning, etc. But I want to ask about the elite specifically, because now we've mentioned it, or at least I mentioned it just now, um, and we talked about it in the periphery as well. The elite.net is this name that has, to me, and I imagine to many others as well, somewhat sort of legendary connotations. It's like this elite club basically with the best of the best of this really difficult speed game. So, can you tell me like what the elite is and why and how has it survived to this day rather than, a lot of other communities going sort of the speedrun.com route and having like a Discord server rather than, an image board or sort of BBS or whatever.
Well, that's a great question, and it just comes down to like the desire of a few people, I suppose. Even I don't know that much, all the details about the early history of the elite. But even as you mention it now, it's like, man, I should learn them and like write a book on it because like this is becoming historic stuff, quite frankly. But there was a gentleman by the name of Derek Clark, and he was the person who I guess now he makes his living in sort of web design and hosting. And so naturally, even when he was like 15 or 16 years old, he was like, I'm gonna make a website for this. It was just like a small rivalry of like half a dozen guys submitting perfect dark times. And then Clark came along and made the website, and they made a ranking system, and it, had numerous iterations in the years since, numerous automatic updates, manual updates, whatever the case may be. And just he's kept it all these years, and that's why it's still there. And same goes for the forums. I guess, forums were like a Discord back then. It was like, oh, that's the place where everyone's going to hang out and chat. And it just so happens that the community has kept the forums in the years since. And they've been through a few iterations as well on various hosting platforms, Easy Board and then Yuku. And now it's sort of a simple machine, self hosted one. And it just like, I guess it's just a matter of people seeing some value in it, not monetary, but like spiritual in a way, and just like maintaining it just for the sake of it. And I think there's like a big lesson in there. And it kind of ties into, I was also there for the founding of speedrun.com, like Pack, who made speedrun.com in, I think it's like the Guinness Book of Gaming Records 2018 or something. He credits me with like helping give him the kind of like nod, like, yeah, you should make speedrun.com. And he just made it. Like, there was no one telling him to make it necessarily. And in fact, people were telling him not to make it. Like, oh, you can't have a centralized leaderboard. What will this do to the community? And it just like, somebody's just got to do something. And see the process through, and like amazing things can happen from that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And really interesting as well if the same guy who founded the thing is still running it. That is, in your own words, truly remarkable, I would say, because these things have a way of wandering from one pair of hands to the other, and one admin to another, and it only takes one bad admin as well to sort of sink the whole project. So yeah, really
Well,
interesting if it
so I,
stayed.
yes, I have kind of a funny story about that, and so okay, so Clark, I believe he still owns the site and like pays for the hosting, but like as a reasonably successful guy in your 40s, it's like to pay for web hosting for a community site is doable, right? And so God bless him, he's still done it. That's amazing. Um, but as you say, there has been a bit of like admin hot potato here and there, and especially with the forums, they kind of go through different iterations. Now I won't even say the gentleman's username even, but there was one admin, especially back in like the '06 to 2010 era, that I always butted heads with because he just kind of wanted to run the site to the ground. He wanted to run, especially the forums. He had no care about GoldenEye, never really speed ran it. Just one of these like parasites who gets into the position and just to hold some semblance of power, and just that's
Yeah.
all they're there for, and not caring if it thrives or whatever. And so I would always butt heads greatly with this person, and they would have been happy seeing it just die to the ground and becoming their kind of hangout with two or three friends. But what I found was very interesting is that sometime around like AGDQ 2015, so at this point I was growing a following on Twitch, not quite YouTube, and I just kind of coincidentally noticed like they were still kind of around discussing a few things here and there, but after that point, they just vanished from the community completely, and gave the keys to someone else. And perhaps sometimes I wonder if that was just the nature of them growing up and moving on, or if they're like, oh man, like Goose has a bit of a following now, he's gonna absolutely shit on me publicly on the internet. I gotta get out of here before any of that happens. And sometimes I guess if your heart is in the right place, um you can get rid of these bad actors even if they hold more power than you, by just, I guess, being that kind of stone monk warrior, and fending off the evils of the day.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting to hear. Of course, there's always going to be like power struggles and things, and yeah, like you said, there's a lot of those. I think today the kids just call them Reddit mods wholesale. These people who are granted the tiniest sliver of power, and they just become absolutely mad and just really run things in just the most insane way. And yeah, it's always it's strange that these people seem to manage to gain power so efficiently and so consistently as well. But you just gotta hope that because I mean, if it was that long a period, like 2006 to 2010 or something, that's absolutely enough time to like totally destroy a community of that relatively small a size, right?
Yeah, and so it was just kind of like, what's going on here? And well, I mean, a lot of it kind of erupted with the Henning Blom situation, which was the greatest instance of cheating we had seen in the game thus far, where a Swedish speedrunner had spliced a handful of runs and they were on the rankings for a year or more. And we'd seen cases where fake runs have been posted for a few days or a week, and then they come forward and say, like, sorry guys, I was being an idiot. But these ones were for over a year. And the admins were very reluctant to act, slow to act, didn't care about what was going on, and that kind of really, I suppose, lit a fire in a way, and shook up the community. But I've pondered that story many times in speed lores and so on, and that one too is history, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, and we're always gonna have. There's always that lingering threat, I guess, of cheating, splicing, cheating in different kinds of ways, splicing or like in-game cheating of some kind. cheat devices like action replays or stuff like that for older games. What can you really do? I think this is also a strength of having like a smaller community because it's a lot easier to have that sort of trust in a smaller community, I think. Or what would you say when it comes to the whole cheating and splicing situation?
It's hard to say. I don't want to poo poo on Henning that much because this was so long ago. And I'm sure, he's regretful in the years since. But like in this case, he met up with some of the gamers at the Sweden meet of 2010 or 11 and was like, oh, what a great run. That I can't believe the hostages escaped on this frigate secret agent run. True Faith Clemens tells me the story about Henning lying right to his face about it, and that's different from just being kind of an angry kid faking a run here or there for a couple days and raging on the internet before cooling down. It's like lying to a buddy's face in person. And so there's a level of deception that some people will go that guess is surprising. I know it's one of those weird things people wonder with like AI, will there be detection tools and this sort of thing? I haven't really seen too much progress on that yet. I'm just kind of lucky that kind of being outside of it and taking a step back from it, I haven't had to worry about it all that much lately, and I kind of am thankful for that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And like I think like you say, like there's a difference to us, like to normal people, there's a difference between lying on the internet and lying to someone's face. But I think to the people who manage to do that, there might not be as much of a difference, right? It's all sort of in service of me and my goals, I guess. So I guess it just depends on who has a clean conscience and and who does not. But you can't really know that as an outside observer until until the box is open and we see whether the cat is dead or alive to draw that simile.
Yeah, it's a hard thing that I have a hard time putting myself in the shoes of people like that because it's far from how I operate and understand. But luckily in GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, we haven't seen like a big cheating scandal like that lately, and so maybe these are just sorts of growing pains that communities experience. Like maybe that's the case, and they're less likely to occur as time goes on. We can be hopeful that way, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think also like uh it's always interesting how blatantly some people cheat and the hubris of kind of like I'm going to get away with this because I've gotten away with it so many times in the past. And then you have to think about these, splicers, for example, who are only caught when someone does a sort of like spectrograph analysis of the sound mixing or whatever, and people who go even further than that, like to cover their tracks. And like you could just spend this time getting good at the game, surely, because a lot of these people are really good at the game, but they start cheating, to sort of just keep that little edge that they might need to just stay on top for these weeks or months that they might stay on top. And like you got to wonder what drives that sort of that impulse to spend all that time gaining that edge instead of just gaining that edge fair and square.
Yeah, a lot of it is perhaps just like desperation, or you just get so sometimes you just get so sucked into something, and you're just behaving irrationally, and you don't know why, and you just have to you have to step back, and it literally becomes a touch grass scenario where it's like take a deep breath, step away, and reassess.
Yeah, absolutely. And like it's so touching grass, I think I think is like ironically or unironically, I guess, really important. Like it's become this meme where like please go outside and like talk to people. But it is super important to not get that tunnel vision, like, this matters so much. Because like we said previously, right? I would definitely say, at least in most respects, that for example, climbing a mountain is sort of a nobler pursuit than speedrunning is. Or like you said, you made a comparison to military service there, which is at least in most or in a lot of cases a nobler pursuit than speedrunning. I would think. So you have to be careful not to conflate. Just because you think something's important doesn't mean that it's the be all end all of human society or the human destiny sort of in the universe. It's really, really easy to fall into that trap when you're just sitting there, staring at your old CRT and just thinking like, if I ah could just push this one more second, then I would like cement my name. But you have to be careful not to, yeah, to submit to hubris, I guess.
No, of course, and I've actually seen the grounders talking about it too lately. Is the people who believe that actually touching the earth is very healthy for you, really saying like, look, touch grass. We had it solved this whole time. That's all you got to do is just walk barefoot in the grass, and that's going to do wonders for everything.
Yeah, interesting philosophies all around. You got to wonder how, you know, because now that, I mean, this is something that we've talked about previously as well. Now that speedrunning and everything has gone so mainstream, you have to wonder about the width and breadth of different perspectives and things that are being included in this as well. Again, for better or for worse, I think. But where do you sort of stand on that? Where this is something that, again, we talked about previously, sort of things going from really tiny and really niche to more wide. But what do you think specifically about people with, it's not only going to be these sort of basement dwellers and things, if you take my meaning, that are doing this, it's also going to be kids that download a 64 emulator on their phone and start trying out Mario 64, just in 20 minutes time. So what do you think about that sort of wealth of perspective that's being introduced?
Well, I mean, from where I stand now, I think it's a good thing because even though, like 10, 12 years ago, I hated it. These people coming along on emulators and, I was less mature myself and I was thinking like, oh man, this crazy guy playing an emulator, he thinks of the same thing. It's not, this is just insane. But from where I kind of am now is more as you described, the kind of monk storyteller. Look, I don't mind because they might find some interesting or new perspective. I think it's important, like competitive wise, to have the even playing ground. So a lot of the cases, I don't think emulator is appropriate to play, especially in my wheelhouse, the N64. It's so it's never been able to emulate well, and so there's no satisfactory kind of version of that can be on any even playing field. But what I would say to anyone, and I've been saying this for years, is like if that's the only way you can play, um, then play that way, and do it. But just know that you're not on the same even playing field, and there's costs to that, I suppose. And maybe eventually you'll learn, you'll enjoy it, and you'll get the better equipment, the proper equipment, and go from there. But like, I did a video recently about the UFO of Jolly Roger Bay, and it was a guy in an emulator who like captured footage for me that helped figure out what was going on in this strange urban legend. And so you know, that was pretty cool to see, like, okay, these from a storytelling perspective, everyone kind of has their own page to write, I suppose, and I think that's what is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much coming into it, and it's not like it's going backwards either. It's just going to keep growing and getting wider.
Well, yeah, like one thing I noticed recently, and this kind of leads to its own discussion, is like the Neo Geo console is being re-released. I guess the Saudi Arabian what do you call it? Public Investment Fund bought SNK, the manufacturer of this old console, the Neo Geo, and so they're like going to start reselling it and remanufacturing this openly. And so people would discuss things with N64 and PlayStation, other consoles, like how much longer will these games even be playable in terms of the equipment being there and the direct tools and whatnot. And that's why people get into these emulated versions and re-releases and so on and whatever. But it's like it is always possible that there will be kind of official re-releases, official remanufactures of these consoles one way or another. And what does that mean? And I mean, for me, like My N64 still works. I still have working controllers. All of the cartridges still work mostly. One or two might be kind of messed up. Like Mario Party seems to be messed up for some reason, but like most of them still work. And so it's like we're not. That's a bridge that's kind of more distant in the future. Sort of the entropy of the equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great point you bring up as well, not only for for speedrunning or for competing, but also for like preservation of these of these pieces of art, if you want to even push it that far. But I think we can both agree that that video games in their own way are art. And without a way of experiencing the art, what is the point of even I mean, we have to preserve this in some way. And I think these sort of clone consoles, or things like, for example, the FPGA consoles we've seen from Analog and other providers, are good examples of this as well, where they're sort of keeping the dream alive in as good a way that they can, but also modernizing it to make it easier to use with more modern equipment around it as well.
Yeah, and what came to mind for me there is like I know that the Library of Congress in the United States has like films that are declared significant enough for preservation, and they have a whole process on how to do that. And I'm wondering if like video games need the same thing. I'm not sure such a thing exists yet, but maybe we need the video game Library of Congress to preserve some of the most classic and substantial games.
Yeah, and like I think people like yourself, I mean, if it were an American thing, maybe you wouldn't be involved. But people like yourself who are very knowledgeable about a specific video game would absolutely be important to that kind of a process, where I guess people would just have to plead their case. Why is this worthy of preservation? Why is GoldenEye, why does it have this staying power where, if you asked me right now point blank, like, okay, you want to go 2 rounds on complex, slappers only, and I would be like, hell yeah. And there's not a lot of games where you would be down at any time of day, at any point, to just sit down and do a couple rounds. But GoldenEye is definitely one of those.
No, for sure. And sometimes I think of like, man, should I just I don't want to say start a new life, but like go move to some small town and have a little museum and be like the town archivist, and then maybe as on the side have a side building that's the National Video Game Preservation Registry or something, and it'd be kind of a fun a life to lead. It's called the National Film Registry, is what it is, and they decide to preserve films for their cultural, historical, and aesthetic contributions. And yeah, you could certainly do a bunch in video gaming. Absolutely you could. And it's one of these things where, like, I don't know, culturally you decide what is or isn't important, and it's just kind of an unspoken understanding that humans have with one another for some reason.
Yeah, and we also like to. It sort of feeds into the same thing that we've been talking about with speedrunning. Like, we like to rank things as well. This national film registry doesn't have. I don't think it has like a ranking, but I mean, you have to assume that, like, okay, these are movies that are sort of inherently ranked higher than the movies that are not included on this list, because some sort of governing body has decided, like, these are the films that we consider to be culturally important, or whatever the criteria are listed there, culturally significant or impacting, and things like that. And the same goes for any kind of human expression, any kind of art. A painting can be really impactful. We can think, for example, of Picasso's painting of the firebombing of Guernica, for example. Films, of course, can change the whole landscape, and I think video games as well. I think Tetris, for example, was a really good example of this. A Russian-developed game, in the throes of the final shaking years of the Cold War. Very good cultural bridge, and also things like Super Mario Bros. That like revitalized the whole Western market after the Atari crash previously. So definitely something that might be in the future. I give it like 10 or 15 years before we have something similar for video games, probably.
No, right, and it's a great point with paintings and, books, movies, whatever the case may be. It's like, yeah, we might not be able to preserve these things forever, but, like, we can try, and I suppose why not try in the meantime?
Why not try in the meantime? I think is a fantastic place to leave off. I would love to continue this conversation, but I understand you have a life outside this conversation as well, so to speak, as we all do, of course.
No, of course, but, it was a pleasure chatting. We'll do it again sometime, and, I look forward to seeing how, this evolves with these conversations, and, yeah, I mean, look, there's never an end of things to talk about and ponder, and so, anytime I'd love to join and chat more.
Absolutely, you are most welcome. I still have like half of my pre-prepared questions because we ended up spending a lot of time on some of them. But when the conversation flows, it flows, and you're just gonna go with it. So yeah, I'm really happy with this first part. Thank you so much for joining up, and I think I'll end the recording here. Do you have any closing words for us?
Just stay true, my friends.
That there couldn't be a collection of better closing words. We will leave it there. Thank you for joining. Hey, thanks for sticking around until the end if you're listening to this without skipping to it. This is a new thing I've been meaning to get off the ground for a while, and I'm absolutely stoked that the great Goose himself agreed to join me for this inaugural episode, and he will again before too long. I am also reaching out to other creators to converse with, and we'll see where things go. Feel free to suggest guests or to petition someone you would like me to talk to reach out to me. There's going to be an email address in the description. Looking forward to doing this again soon.